You ever look at a map of the world and just kind of take it for granted? You see France, Germany, Italy, and it all seems so permanent, so natural. But what if I told you that just a couple of centuries ago, this whole idea, the very concept of a nation, was a completely radical, revolutionary, and honestly, an almost unimaginable dream? So let's get into it.
Just look at this. This is an incredible vision from 1848 by a French artist, Frédéric Soriot. He called it his dream of a future world. What you're seeing is this long train of people from all over Europe and America, all marching past a Statue of Liberty. And check out what's on the ground in the front. It's all the shattered crowns and junk from the old monarchies. Each group of people is a distinct nation. You can tell by their flags and their clothes, and they're all marching together in this great procession of humanity. Now, this painting was a fantasy in 1848, but just a little while before that, it would have been pure science fiction. The world just wasn't organized this way at all. So that's the big question we're tackling. How did Europe go from a continent of kings and empires to a continent of nations and citizens? What happened? To really get the scale of this change, we first have to understand the world it completely replaced. And that world? Well, it was a world of empires. The main political system back then was absolutism. Basically, it meant that a monarch, a king or an emperor, had all the power. And I mean all of it. No checks, no balances. These governments were built around one ruler, they had big armies, and yeah, they were often pretty repressive. So the Europe of the mid-1700s didn't really have countries the way we think of them. It was more like a messy patchwork quilt of kingdoms and empires. People didn't think of themselves as German or Italian. No, you were a subject of a king. Your loyalty, your whole identity was tied to a person, to a dynasty, not to some shared culture or a plot of land. And this slide, it just perfectly shows how jumbled these empires were. Let's just take the Habsburg Empire, for example. You had a German-speaking elite ruling over people who spoke Italian, Hungarian, and Polish. And under them, you had all these other groups, Croats, Slovaks, Slovenes, all with their own unique languages and traditions. The only thing, and I mean the single thing, holding this whole diverse thing together was their shared loyalty to one guy, the emperor. That's it. So in a world like that, where does the idea of a unified people or a nation even begin? Well, it explodes right out of France. The French Revolution in 1789 is the absolute turning point. It's the first time we see nationalism as a real, powerful political force. For the very first time, revolutionaries stood up and said that the right to rule, sovereignty, was being taken from one king and given to the citizens of France, together. The people, they argued, were the nation. They were the ones who would shape their own destiny. And this wasn't just some abstract idea. These guys were practical. They knew you had to actually build a nation. You had to create a shared identity where one didn't exist. So they came up with new ideas like la patrie, the fatherland, and les citoyens, the citizen. They got rid of the king's flag and brought in the tricolor. They set up a national assembly that was actually elected by the people. And, maybe most importantly for day-to-day life, they created uniform laws and a standard system of weights and measures for everybody, binding the nation together. Now, the French revolutionaries didn't want to keep these amazing ideas to themselves. They felt it was their mission to go out and liberate all the peoples of Europe. And here's the paradox. These ideas of freedom and nationhood started to spread through war and conquest, all led by one man, Napoleon. As Napoleon's armies marched across Europe, they were a walking contradiction. On the one hand, they brought these incredible revolutionary reforms. The Napoleonic Code made everyone equal before the law and protected property. They got rid of feudalism and freed peasants. But on the other hand, this liberation came at a huge cost. People in conquered lands had to pay higher taxes, deal with censorship, and were forced to join the French army to go conquer other places. They got new administrative systems, but they sure didn't get political freedom. As you can probably guess, the reactions to all this were, well, they were mixed. At first, in places like Holland, Switzerland, and Milan, the French armies were welcomed. People saw them as bringing freedom and a new way of life. But that honeymoon period didn't last long. Soon, that excitement soured, and people started to see the French not as liberators, but just as a new occupying army. This quote just nails it. It's from a German print that shows French soldiers putting up a tree of liberty. But the little inscription on it is just dripping with sarcasm. Take freedom and equality from us, the model of humanity. It perfectly captures that feeling when the promise of freedom turned into the bitter reality of being conquered. Okay, so we've got the idea of the nation coming out of France, and we see it spreading sometimes in a really weird way through Napoleon's wars. But there was one final ingredient that was needed to turn this into a fire that would sweep the whole continent, and that was a brand new social class.
As the Industrial Revolution got going, a new group started to gain power: the educated, commercial middle class. We're talking about industrialists, businessmen, doctors, lawyers. And they were really tired of the old system where aristocrats got all the privileges. For them, the idea of national unity wasn't just some romantic notion. No, this was about practical stuff. A unified nation meant no crazy internal taxes, one currency, and laws that were the same everywhere. All things that were great for business.
And their guiding philosophy was liberalism. At its heart, liberalism was all about freedom for the individual, equality for everybody under the law, and the really radical idea that a government should be based on the agreement of the people it governs, not just the whim of a king. And right here, this is where it all comes together. This new middle class took that idea of nationalism and fused it with their own political belief in liberalism. The result? An absolutely explosive combination that would literally redraw the map of Europe. For them, a nation-state was the only way to guarantee both their personal freedoms and their ability to get ahead in the world. So, after all of this chaos, all this revolution and war and sacrifice, what was actually created? What does it really mean to be a nation, anyway? The French philosopher Ernst Renan gave maybe the best answer back in 1882. He argued that a nation isn't really about a common race or religion or even land. It's about a shared past, a history of struggles and successes. But most importantly, he said, its existence is a daily plebiscite, which is just a fancy way of saying it's a daily vote. A nation exists because its people, every single day, collectively choose for it to exist. And believe me, this powerful idea had massive real-world consequences. That dream we saw in the first painting from 1848, it sparked actual revolutions all across Europe that very year. It's what led directly to the creation of countries like Germany and Italy. And by the early 1900s, new nationalist movements were tearing the last of those old multinational empires apart from the inside. Which brings us right back to us here today. If Renan was right, if a nation's very existence is a choice that we all make every day, what is it that holds a nation together now? What are the shared stories, the shared struggles, the shared hopes that convince all of us to keep casting that yes vote? It's something to think about, right?